I want to say hello to you. It's a nice occasion to meet you and to talk to you. Actually, today I want to speak about how to do urban analysis, in particular about the methods of diagramming. And this will, of course, be about the city that you have to analyze, and according to your according to your project, you're going to do it in the Chinese side or the German side. I will also briefly tell you something, although you did already excellent research about this, the current group of people about who are running Documenta 15, the Ruan group from Indonesia. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, I don't know why I cannot press the button. Do you know why I cannot do it?
What button?
To press next, or is it possible to give me the access?
We have to press next for you. We're pressing next.
Okay, okay. Okay, I'm gonna do this very quickly because it's actually what you should do, you know, the urban analysis, not only about the current urban fabric, but also the historic urban fabric of Kassel. However, as you can see here, Kassel started as a kind of small but important medieval town around 1,100 years ago. And it was a kind of, the origin was a fortress, you know, to protect against the outside. And of course, in this very typical situation, it is located next to an important river called Fulda. Next one, please. And as you can see here, interestingly, you know, this is the heart of the city here. Oh, you don't see my cursor. Okay, anyway. So the heart of the city expanded, and through the time of Baroque, the local lord, or let's call it local king, was impressed by the French kings, the French royals, and people started to build a landscape park with little castles and representative buildings. You can see it next to the river, you know it already, and you see it on the very left. They started to build a mountain park, which was very unique at that time. Next one, please. And these things basically were, let's say, the poles A, B, C, so anchor points, where then during the early, the middle, and the late industrial revolution, the city filled in. And always, as you can imagine, the implementation of the train station is a very big stage of urban development. So you can see here. Meanwhile, as you can imagine, like 20 years ago, approximately a new train station more outside of the city was built, so that this train station became a kind of local train station and a cultural institution where they also have exhibitions and so on during Documenta. Next one. So this is basically the situation that you already know, and it's a current situation of Kassel today. However, the park, the emblematic Baroque park, is still very important and a major asset of the collective memory, the collective asset of the city. You see the old train station at the top left, and a spine which basically runs all the way through down to the park. Crossing Friedrich Square, with all the huge museums of Documenta. And when you then are down in the park and next to the river and you cross the river to the east, you see there is a kind of a certain informality made out of very little, let's say, weekend homes with little gardens and industry spaces on the right. So why do I say this? Each documenter has a different, let's say, locality in the city. Of course, there are the major museums that they always use, like Fridericianum, but each curator or curator group in this case look for other different urban interventions or urban places to have another which fit to their philosophy. Next one, please. With this background, I want to introduce you to Ruang Grupa. It's an artist group from Indonesia, and they really after political changes they formed, and they want to work in a kind of community and collective manner from different disciplines together with other groups. So it's more about yes, it is about physical art, but it's also a social art project. The background of these guys is very diverse. Some of them are artists, some of them are even architects, as you guys want to be. They studied here and there, even in the States. So it's a very nice group of people, and we are closely working with them. After the lecture of the urban analysis, I also want to show you projects that we currently develop with them, so-called resting points, installations, which are embedded between the exhibition sites. So basically very similar to what you are working on this semester. Next one. And this is Lumbum. So what does it mean? Wait, actually I can read the text. Lumbum is the Indonesian word for collectivity governed rice barn, where harvest surplus of farmers is shared for common good. It serves communities' well-being on longer term through shared resources and mutual care. So this is basically their metaphor, their symbol for the whole Documenta 15, a place to meet, to talk, to exchange thoughts, and to share resources. If you have more than you need, you have a surplus, then you can share it with someone who is in need, who can benefit from your resources. And that's the main concept, the main idea of Documenta 15, which of course should have an impact into the society for more equality, for sharing, for helping each other. Next one, please. Next one, please. And here, this map is important for you. I'm sorry, maybe someone wants to sit there. Yeah, this one, it's important for you because it shows an overview map of the venues and infrastructure of Documenta 15. So it's on the upper left, it's adjacent to the old train station. In the center, you have the Ruru headquarters, the Fridericianum, and the Documenta exhibition hall. And then it goes into the east part to Hallenbad Ost. Hallenbad means pool. So it's a transformed old pool, which is now a kind of collective space for working and showing artwork. And it goes into the industrial area and industrial construction companies into the east. Next one, please. Okay, this was a brief background about Kassel, Documenta 15, and a little bit about the exhibition. But now I start the lecture of urban analysis and diagramming in particular. Next one, please. So I have to give you a little background about the so-called metaphysical pathos. It goes back to someone called Lovejoy. He observed that every theory associated with or generates a set of sentiments which thus subscribe to a theory could only dimly sense. Lovejoy calls this metaphysical pathos of idea a pathos which is exemplified in any description of the nature of things, characterization of the world which it belongs to, in terms which, like the words of a poem, evoke through their association and through a sort of empathy which they engender a congenial mood of or a tone of feelings. So this sounds very philosophical almost, but the point is the metaphysical pathos is the core idea of your findings. That's the point, that's all. You know, you don't analyze because you want to analyze because you want to find the core message of a map, of a drawing. That's what you want to show, and that's the main idea of diagramming, to abstract and to find a core idea, the so-called metaphysical pathos. Next one. And this is always, when you look at something, it jumps right into your eyes. So you look at it, you analyze it, and then you see, okay, in this drawing, because of this technique, the author wants to show us or wants to guide us to something very specific. And in this map, of course, it's a three-dimensional part with the shadows. So don't be distracted. Always try to see and to understand the core of a drawing. Next one. As you can see here, this is the metaphysical pathos, the core of the drawing that the author wants to share with you. Next one. And this is what we also call to call you, is extracting the unit idea. So the main idea, the core of your urban analysis. And the first part I want to talk about is morphology, city form, the system of form and the system of movement. And the variables in this sense are history and scale. But keep in mind, we speak about morphology, and it's not only about the physical form, it's also about the form which flows through the forms. Next one. We subdivide the city into two parts, the physical, the built city, and the unbuilt city, the sociological city. By the way, guys, of course you can make notes, but you will have all of this material. We will give it to you as well as the references, okay? I'm just saying. The physical city, the built city, you will do the morphological analysis. You will check the open spaces, the infrastructure, the built form, the boundaries, etc. So the physical space. The sociological analysis could contain demographics, income, rent versus ownership, history, religion, myth, and so on. Next one, please. And both of these can be mapped. The sociological part as well as the morphological part. On the left hand, for instance, you see a map of the different income of people. So where do different groups live and why do they live there? What's the reason about that? That's important, for instance. That's one specific thing, but it's important to understand a city. And of course, the morphological analysis, that's a little bit more easy for us. As you see on the right, you see, for instance, here in Brussels, you see the old, they call it Pentagon, the old city center, which is embedded into a certain topography you see in the center, and then you see the grid of the circulation, which expanded over time. Next one. And this is why I'm saying it's so interesting, because when you do certain morphological analysis, you will always be able to extract the unit idea, or let's call it the unique idea, because the unit idea is autonomous from time and location. And this, for instance, is a mapping of property lines. Don't misunderstand me. Of course, this will change over time. But the core, the idea behind of this, the metaphor, the metaphysical pathos will not change. And that's what we call the unit idea. Next one. Morphological analysis of flows and form at the scale of the city and the project allows an understanding of the relationship between the two. This relationship often reveals the civic structure of the project and the unit idea of the public sphere. So we try to understand not only the object, but also the surrounding of the object, the neighboring buildings, and in particular, the space in between. And this is something you can analyze very interestingly in an example in America, in the city of Las Vegas, because there is this famous so-called strip which connects the different huge buildings along this main boulevard. So flows and form. Next one. So we analyze the form, as I said, not only on the project level, but also on the city level. And on the city level, we do it with the so-called nollie plans. I'm not sure, are you familiar with the wording nollie plan? Can you give me a sign? Does it say something to you? No? Okay, the nollie plan, it's from Italy, and it's very interesting because it's basically, let's say, a black plan. We call it Schwarzplan, black plan in Germany. So it shows the urban fabric, the urban grain, the relation between the built space and the open space. And of course, there are usually like important artifacts. And there is a civic infrastructure. And importantly, not only the artifacts, the big important museums or churches or castles or whatever do matter, the generic civic structure, the type and the grain matters a lot. It might change over time, but at the end of the day, there is always a reason behind it. So a unit idea. And in terms of form, we also analyze the project level. The figure ground, the structure of the project, and the type and the grain, and spaces in between. On the other hand, we speak about the flow. It's always important. Don't analyze the form. Always think about the form and the flow, because this is the blood which runs through the veins of the city. No form can be independent from the flow. And so you analyze the same on the city and the project level. On the city level, it's the regional infrastructure like highways, trains and rivers, etc. As you can see, as you can saw as you can could have seen on the maps. And you also do, of course, on the project level. So the local movements, the pedestrian movements, the bikes, the cars, and not only the flowing movements, also the resting, the still movement. Where do people park? Where's the entry? Where's the exit of a building? Next one. Systems of form, understanding the public space that emerges between form. How does the placement of a form relate to flows? What is the organizational principle governing the placement of forms? So this is what I've just said, you know, it's so important to understand not only the buildings and the space between the buildings, but also the flow between the buildings, because you want to be right about your entrance and the exit of your buildings. That it fits into the system and it's not kind of turning the back to the system, but it's inviting and part of the system. Next one, please. Now I come to the different points that I just introduced to you. Let's start with the form on the city level. So we start step by step the morphological analysis through different layers. In this case, we see a small town in the center of Switzerland. And since it's a kind of nice scale, you can easily understand and map and diagram various layers. So you see the waters at the top. It's kind of an exploded axonometry. You see the forest, the settlement, the agriculture, the infrastructure, and the fallow land. And each of this can be mapped and put apart in order to understand the relationship and the logic behind it. Next one, please. But you can also go further down and try to find other morphological layers of the city. So the settlements in this sense can be deeper analyzed on the regional level, the local level, and also the neighborhood level. And this gives you the opportunity to see where are more dense spaces, like connections on the regional level, and where are transit lines and why are they there? And you can see the left spaces, the open spaces. So this gives you, by comparison and overlapping two of these or three of these, it gives you information about things which have usually reasons or decisions made behind these movements. Next one. And of course, we can always go deeper into it. From a regional level, we can go into a local level and we can try to understand more of the city. Where are, for instance, commercial areas? Where are mixed use areas? And where are residential areas? Next one. So these are the so-called urban functions. This is because we always compare different cities. Now we jump back to Brussels, the core, the so-called Pentagon, and we want to understand why certain things are in which places, because of physical conditions, because of physical connections. And in this sense, you see on the drawing down, because of certain major artifacts, maybe major institutional buildings or traditional buildings like the castle of the emperor. Next one. and an overlay and a comparison between these artifacts that you also saw in Kassel and the space in between, the spine, and what's happening along this spine. It's going to fill up with, again, major buildings in the first row, and in the second row, it's going to be filled with less important buildings, like residential buildings, for instance. Next one, please. Same with Las Vegas, with the Strip. You see the artifacts on the one hand, but you also see the major road, the flow, building and flow. Next one. You can see parts of the Strip of Las Vegas, the undeveloped land. You see the buildings on the upper right, the asphalt, the ceremonial space. You see the autos, so the resting, the still standing part of the flow, the parking, and you see the Nolly plan of Las Vegas. Next one. And again, as I just showed you in Brussels, in Belgium, you can do, of course, the same with the buildings in Las Vegas. In this sense, where are the rooms, the hotel rooms, the casinos, the patios, and the conferences. Next one. And when it comes to the project, it's important to not only understand the structure of the project itself and the structure of the surrounding. No, when they have a certain public relevance, as in this case, the center of Brussels, the inner part of the buildings themselves are public spaces. This is a kind of eye-opening situation which you might know from this very famous Nolly plans from Rome. When you see the Nolly plan of Rome, you suddenly see Nolly did not only draw the exterior public space, he also put in the same drawing the public spaces within the buildings. The most famous one, of course, is the Parthenon. And here, the author did the same. He wanted to show the importance of public buildings and the public aspect of these buildings, although they are interior, in relation to the city context themselves, itself. And we do have the same in our project, in our studio class this semester. So you work on public spaces which are outside of buildings and which are also inside of the buildings. When you develop your projects, or your cooling tower in China, for instance, it's a space in between. There's a certain public relevance about this. Next one, please. Changing now from the form to the movement, the system of movements, understanding the regional and local flows and how these interact with forms. First, flows as infrastructure. Second, flows as recorded movement. Third, flows as stage. Next one, please. Ich habe eine Lecture, ne? Sorry, just 1 second. Thank you. So, sorry guys, I was interrupted. Someone brought me tea. Thanks a lot. Okay. Flows as infrastructure on a city level. Representation of regional flows and nodes. As you can see in this map, there are mapped the main railway stations, the underground, the tram, and overlapped later with highways. So it's a regional level. And this is also important for you when you analyze Kassel. For a moment, you really have to understand the regional flows around Kassel, the so-called Autobahn or highway, and the regional network of the speed train called ICE train. So please have a careful look at these huge infrastructure flows in and around Kassel. Next one, please. Same in Las Vegas, but here, as you can imagine, a typical automobile-driven city, we focus on the car, not so much about the train. Because in this context, the car plays a major role, not only the car as a moving object, but also the car as a parking object. Next one. And all of these can be overlaid. So the city form, the pedestrian walkways, the roads, and the overlaying of these, the regional stations and open spaces. Next one. And now we come to an interesting part where you can see from these drawings where we do not only analyze the flow in the urban design, the open space, but we also analyze the flow within buildings, flows as recorded movement on the project scale, how flows interact with the form, path and access points are revealed. Next one. And what does it make? How do you design the spaces? How many people do you expect? Who are the visitors? Do they come by public transportation? Do they come by car, by train, by bicycle? How do they interact with the building? So this is what we call flows as stage on the city scales. Flows emerge in the space between the building. Next one. You know, my point is students always tend to draw the buildings on the one hand sometimes and the open space on the other hand. But in fact, it's not only about this abstract open space. You always have to understand that the relationship is not this positive negative always. No, that's one thing. Yes, I agree. But the other one is that there are flows. People use the open space and the building space, and this is what gives life. And this is the reason for interaction. A building itself and an open park in front of it, in fact, they don't talk to each other. They just coexist. The elements, the grain, the material which talks to each other are the people, the flows that use these spaces. That is the relationship between open and built-up spaces. Next one. You know, a very famous sociologist from America, who was my professor and also Ying's professor, he said, make sure that your buildings talk to each other. But what he was really saying is, what he was really saying is that make sure that the people who use these buildings and open spaces talk to each other. People speak to each other, not buildings, but we can make the design of the buildings that people talk to each other and speak to each other. And this is something we have very often in situations where, of course, things are very dense on the one hand, and where different stages, different project scales, as here you can see in the center of Brussels, and you have these situations many times in Beijing as well, are overlaying. This is a project by Javier de Gaete from Brussels. Next one. And now I come to the civic structure, the relationship between flows and form, the template of the public sphere. Next one. This is an urban analysis map. Brussels. Next one, please. So we come to a smaller city called Rigor City. It's a case study, and we want to understand the communal scale with the most important infrastructure: the railway, the main roads, and the motorway. Step by step, we're going to dive in so you understand the relationship between the larger flow and the smaller flow, in this case, study. Next one. You see the main connection between main administration areas and buildings within the west corridor of the Brussels capital. So the west corridor connecting the library of the European Union and the Parliament. Next one. And this is, when I come back to my introduction, a drawing where you want to show, after your analysis, the core of your findings, the unique idea, the metaphysical pathos. Next one. Why do I show these drawings? I show these drawings because they focus on something. They have a meaning, they have a vision. So when you design your objects, you want to make sure that it fits into a system, that it relates to other projects, that it spans a grid, that it's embedded into a larger meaning. And this is something you can do when you turn into axonometric drawings and connect them by the flows, the streets, the pedestrian walkways, and leave out all of the rest. Next one. When you concentrate on the main unit, the main idea that you want to focus on, in this sense, on the scale or by the means of the flow. Next one. And all of these can be like split and analyzed step by step, part by part, between private spaces, public spaces, and infrastructure spaces. Next one. And now it comes to variable 1, history, understanding the morphological build-up of the surrounding fabric and how the project sits within it. You always have to understand that whatever you do in your life later as an architect, you will be part of history. Your project or your urban intervention, your public space, whatever you're going to design, it's part of a history that has been occurred and that will happen. And that's important to understand, that this is a variable. Next one. So here you can see very nicely in Brussels how the city evolved over time and why the city changed over time. So it starts with the core next to the river, the so-called Pentagon, and it expanded during the time of the kingdom between 1830 and 1880. So let's say the Industrial Revolution. So a ring was kind of rounded, as you also saw in Kassel in the beginning of my lecture. And it's a very typical urban expansion. And who else than you knows how this looks like? Because Beijing is a very typical concentric city which developed from the very core to the fringe, to the edges of the cities. And a huge step, of course, was made during and after the Industrial Revolution, especially in European cities. Next one. Same here, but totally different. In this Uyghur city case study, as a comparison, you see there was no core, there was no king or emperor or something like this. This was a bunch of little communities, little villages, which expanded over time and later became so close to each other that they formed a new little city. So it's a totally different approach. It's not the inside-out approach, it's the outside-in approach. Next one. And as you remember from Kassel, we have two things basically. We have an inner expansion from the core to the outside, but at the same time, we had this anchor outside, the castle at the mountain, with this huge alley. So the city grew from within, but it grew also from outside in. And little villages around the city were kind of eaten or merging with the city over time. And this is something that you can excellently analyze with these Nolly plans, where you can show over time the expansion and the growth and the change of the city throughout history. Next one. And of course, when you analyze Kassel, you will be confronted with the Second World War. Kassel was extremely destroyed during the Second World War, so sometimes there is not always a certain consistent growth and development of the city. Sometimes there is a huge interruption, a war, where things are destroyed and the city is empty, and after that it's going to be rebuilt, and sometimes in the same way, but sometimes in a totally different way. Like Kassel was not rebuilt in a medieval manner. It was built according to the thoughts and the ideas of modernism. Berlin, on the other hand, was rebuilt, especially the eastern part, after reunification, in a more traditional way. There are different attitudes, different thoughts about this, as you can imagine. But you can also see not only the build forms, you can also see the flows, the regional flows changed and mapped over time. Next one. And now I come to the second variable, the scale. understanding how the project operates at the civic and the local scale. Next one. This is something we call Netzstadttheorie, net city theory, which was developed at ETH around 15 years ago. So you can analyze the so-called net, and a net is not only lines, in particular it has these nodes on the building level, the neighborhood level, the city level, the regional level, and the nation level on the right. Next one. And again, as you can see here, similar with the example of rigor, you see the regional part of architecture of the territory with the nodes. You see it on the space in between and the local level. Why do I say this? I'm saying this that it's important that you understand the location of your building. Is it at a node, an intersection, an important place because you want to generate traffic, or is it offside the main road, the main traffic, because you want to create silence, for instance? Next one. So some final words about diagramming. Please listen carefully. It's important for you to use graphic precision. I guess that's also something which Bu and Ying are telling you all the time. Use drawings and diagramming to reveal your metaphysical pathos with clear lines, with precision. It is often more effective to use more detail to exaggerate than to thicken the line. So don't use the big pen, use a very precise pen. The principle of diagramming is omitting 99% of the information to isolate what you are trying to say. So a level of, you have to reach a level of abstraction, of leaving stuff away to find the unit idea. Make diagrams only as big as they need to be. Sometimes a diagram should fit on a stamp in order to understand, to reveal the unit, the core idea. Try to diagram in black and white first. Don't use too many colors. If there are too many variables, use a few colors to capture the essence of the diagram. So work in black and white first, but if you want to show other layers or other things which are important, then carefully work with colors. But please don't work with these blurry Photoshop diagrams which look fancy, but nobody understands. Be precise and clear with what you want to say and what will lead you to a great design which fits into the urban form, the flow, the history, and the scale of the city. And with this, next one, please. I want to finish, but before I finish, I want to give you the literature. It's a very famous literature that I basically quoted and which I used for this lecture. So it's from Berlage Institute. They did the research about Brussels, the capital of Europe, called Brussels. Javier de Gaeta, the book called After Sprawl. Franz Oswald, The Netzstadt, Designing the Urban, the Net City Theory. And of course, you know, Aldo Rossi, Typological Questions, and probably the most famous one, you know, from Robert Venturi and Dennis Scott Brown, Learning from Las Vegas, MIT Press 1972. So thanks a lot. And with this, I want to pause for a second. And after the pause, I would like to share with you some ideas, some little projects that I'm doing together with and for Documenta 15. Okay, I want to quickly show you what I basically do together with my colleagues from Kassel. You know that maybe later in the semester I will share more work with you from what I do with my office, but I want to quickly show you some work that we are doing with Kassel. I had an exhibition by the end of last year in Kassel, in the so-called KATZ, the Kassel Architecture Center. And it was interesting because the curators of Documenta came by, they saw our work, and they invited me and friends to collaborate with them. And through this relationship, I also basically integrate you and your work to Documenta 15, and later during the semester the main curators will also be invited to see your work and to give you feedback on your work. It's not easy because they are super busy, but since it's the most important art exhibition in the world, it's a big honor for us that they show interest in our studio and also in your work. So I want to share 4 little installations that I designed for Documenta 15. We have to erect this, we have to build this in the next time. There are 4 other groups. One group is doing a little installation next to the Ruru house, the headquarter of Documenta. Another one will be down by the river called Fulda. And as you remember, the Documenta also goes into the east part of the city. 2 of the other teams work in the east part. However, coming to my 4 little installations, we have one installation next to Friedrichsplatz, the main square of the city, next to the big exhibition halls, the museums. And we have 3 down in the park next to the cross-shaped Karlswiese, where also a major installation from artists from China will happen. So it's a very interesting mix of different exhibitions. And between these exhibition spaces, we install small reflection points where people can have a rest and exchange ideas and speak about what they saw and what they experienced when they visited the exhibitions. Next one. So this is a 3D overview, and the pavilion on the upper right, it's called Black Rock. And then you have a kind of cut, but I didn't, because it has to fit on everything has to fit on one drawing. There is this huge space in between. So the Black Rock is the more urban one next to the square in the city, and the 3 other ones, Wood Rock, Green Rock, and Tree Rock, are down in the park, connected by a path. Next one. The Black Rock is made out of coal. So in fact, I mean, it's ironic, but we call it coal museum. The message is that we have to exit the use of coal for energy production, to burn coal, not in 20 or 30 years. We have to exit, we have to get out of this disaster earlier, much earlier. So we have to put coal into the museum now and not in 30 years. Because coal is a major source of CO2, the main reason for climate change. That's why this little pavilion is more like a metaphor to put coal into museum now and not too late, because it destroys humanity. Next one. So, and the whole little pavilion will made out of little coal briquettes, as you can see here. Next one. It's up to 4 or 5 people, so you go in, and within these little gaps, you will already have some green plants, which basically break and explode the pavilion from the inside. Because of course we are not naive. We know that industry countries need coal, but the possibility to produce energy by renewable energies and by solar panels, by wind, by water, by biogas, the idea and the technique is there. We just have to do it. We just have to speed up. Next one. Here you can see how the pavilion is structured. So we have a primary structure inside and the mesh structure, which is a secondary structure, and the bricks of the coal outside. The next one. These are some elevations. Next one. And if you go to the can you go back to the second page? Yes, and you see, you see black rock, you see something around, don't you? A white sheet with black footprints. And this is something which is, to me, a document of time. In the beginning, I will put there a white sheet. And when you go inside, you don't even feel it, but there is a little bit coal on the ground. And when you get out of the pavilion, you will have little pieces of dust, little pieces of coal underneath your feet. And you go outside and you mark this sheet, this fabric. And when the installation is dismantled after 100 years, the center will be white and surrounding will be black. So it's the metaphor for the ecological footprint of each of us as a document of our time, which is very dangerous because we live on the shoulders of our children. We consume too much energy, and especially too much fossil energy, which is incredibly dangerous for our planet. That's why this is a waking up call. And now I go with you to the 3 other pavilions, which are made out of wood. Can you go further. Next one. Next one. So you can see already that the next pavilion down in the park is broken up. It's not enclosed anymore. It's not self-referenced. It's opening up. Next one. And the material will be wood. Everything will be out of wood. It's renewable. So these things, it's not the pavilion yet. It's just, I'm just showing the material. This pavilion will be out of wood. Next one. Where people can meet, talk, and also pin up their ideas, their visions for a green and ecological future, where we don't use coal anymore, where we use renewable energy. Next one. Where people can also not only sit inside, but where they also have a view into the surrounding, in the beautiness of the park landscape. Next one. Where they can pass by, where they can go in, and where they can read the ideas and visions of the people. Next one. The next pavilion is a zone of transition. It's not so much a talking object in the landscape. It is a zone of transition, the flow, as you remember maybe from last time from the lecture 30 minutes ago. Next one. So you will go into a little tube which opens up into a community space where the roof is formed by a tree, where you sit next to each other and where you can talk and exchange ideas. Next one. And it's also made out of wood. This is a mock-up, just to give you an idea how this will look like. Next one. There's a tube, it opens up, and then you again leave it by a tube, and you go to the last, to the pavilion number 4. Next one. This is an elevation. Next one. This is the last installation. It's called Woodrock, and it's made out of one tree. So if you would put these elements, these trunks together, you would have one tree. Next one. Oops. And this tree has been planted by my great-grandmother 130 years ago. So the tree is 130 years old, planted by a young girl 130 years ago. But it died 2 years ago because of climate change. It just was dying because the summers were too hot and there was no water anymore to survive. It's a huge disaster. It's a pity. And this tree we use also as a symbol to change the way of thinking, to change the material, to reuse reusable materials. Next one. To widen our perspective, to change our perspective, to create a space more integrated into nature, talking to nature, listening to nature, and not just extracting from nature, but to think in a circular way, not in a linear way of extraction, consumption, and disposal, but to think in a circular way, a circular economy. Next one. Here you can see how it's made, the section. Next one. And finally, you see a little mock-up, a little concept model, how it's more or less gonna look like. And with this, I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you. Okay, are there any questions? Do you have questions?
Yes, I have one question. Chris, can you hear me?
Can you get a little bit closer, please?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, excellent.
Okay, so I was studying on the artwork made by Roman Ziegner at Documenta 8, and it was put in the Cars Visa at the same spot as your work is in. So I was wondering, do you have any ideas? Or I was studying on the Cars Visa for like a week, and I was a bit of confused because of the lack of materials. So I was wondering, maybe you can give me a few instructions or a few informations about the square.
Sure. Do you want to go back to the first page, please?
Okay.
So at the end of the day, it's a huge park with different things. The building that you see next to this cross symbol, it's called Orangerie. Orangerie, it's not a palace or something like this. It's interesting. It's more like a greenhouse, you know? It's like a summer house where you have a lot of sun, where you have some plants and so on. And this is reacting in communication with the cross shape. This is kind of, you know, a Baroque symbol influenced by the French Baroque history. And this then expands deep into the landscape, following two artificial canals.
Yes.
The Fulda on the right, the Fulda, of course, that's a traditional river. Of course, it's kind of made linear. It's like under control, but it's not artificial, it's natural. And the other two canals are artificial. And when you think about an urban, when you think about your intervention, you wanna think about, do you want to have it in this kind of more formal position and the open space of the Karlswiese, which is a very popular space, not only during Documenta, but also during normal times when people go there, when students go there to play, to mingle, to chat, to party? Or do you want to go into the more landscape park situation next to the two canals, where you have open spaces, but also trees and islands, different species, where the scenery changes? So we decided on purpose to have one installation in a more urban area next to the Friedrichsplatz up there,
Yes.
and three in a more silent area. Because in our case, Karlswiese, the cross during Documenta will be very busy by different artists from all over the world. And we are a little bit adjacent to have this calm and silent situation.
Okay. And I saw you used the shape of the cross in almost every installations. Does it have a special meaning for you, or is there any other reasons?
No, this was, yes, I'm happy that you saw this, because this Karlswiese, the symbol, it's so emblematic for the whole city. And it's a place which people associate with happiness, with a nice time. So we use this symbol as a positive core symbol in our projects for the sake of identification.
Okay, okay, I understand it. I have no more questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, maybe we have no more questions. So thank you again, Chris, and we hope to see you in another class.
Okay, so thanks a lot and have a nice day. Good work. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye
Have
bye.
fun. Bye.
Bye bye. 那个各位同学，请把今天的这个工作扫描以后上传，然后把录像上传，然后如果有同学错过了这个别的同学的评图呢，可以回看一下录像。因为有些同学是用手机拍的录像，也请一并上传。好，我们期待下一次的工作，谢谢，拜拜。
谢谢老师，谢谢各位老师。
各位辛苦了，拜拜，拜拜，拜拜，拜拜。